Hello, welcome to Players in Exile. My name is Phil. Today I'd like to talk to you about my daughter's Prime Speaker Zegana EDH or Commander deck. About 5 years ago, when she was a little bit younger, I decided to teach my daughter Magic the Gathering, and eventually we gravitated to learning Commander. And I wanted to give her a deck that had a lot of power, but reasonable amounts of simplicity to play. And the deck has evolved over time. It started out being use green to get the land, use blue to get draw, blue obviously things like counter spells, and then we kind of based it off of Whelming Wave, so it was a Leviathan, Serpent, Octopus, Kraken deck. Now over the years it has evolved, and I don't think Whelming Wave is even part of the deck anymore. It uses a few more different types of creatures. There's a few Planewalkers in there. We've added a few pretty good cards, like you've got Rhystic Study there. Down here we've got classic Cyclonic Rift. But we haven't played Commander for maybe 2-3 years now. So the thought was that we would start playing again, and in order to be able to do so, we could just start playing with the deck again. But who can resist going online and looking at what's available and what's been released, and seeing what we can upgrade the deck with that's now available that wasn't before. So that's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to talk through my immediate purchases, what I actually have already purchased, and how I've changed the deck, and then I'm going to talk through what else is catching my eye and what I might actually purchase for her going forwards to add a little bit more variety to the deck. And that's what it's all about. It's all about adding a bit of fun and adding a bit of variety, changing up some of the cards in here that I look at now and think, you know what, that card really doesn't really need to belong in this deck. So here we go. We're going to look at that. First up, there's a couple of new lands. There's Rejuvenating Spring, and I immediately took out the Guildgate that was languishing in the deck and swapped it for Rejuvenating Spring. And there's also Bark Channel Pathway, which I've fished out of Forest and replaced it with. Now, Bark Channel Pathway is Bark Channel Pathway, yes. Bark Channel Pathway is the one that flips over, so it can be basically a forest or an island. So I've taken the forest out. I'm not sure if that's the right call, whether we do need to get that forest in there, in which case I might look at taking something else out instead. Time will tell with that one. Next up, I had a look at the deck. Now the deck, as we're looking at it, runs 3 ways to keep cards in your hand. You've got Reliquary Tower, you've got Thought Vessel, and wherever you have right down the bottom somewhere. There he is, Netherhall. You have no maximum hand size. So there's 3 ways at the moment in the deck where you have no maximum hand size, but there's been other cards released since then that say that you have no maximum hand size. So the first one I got on the list was Body of Knowledge, and I took out Stinger Fling Spider. I don't really know why Stinger Fling Spider is in there. Okay, it destroys a flyer when you land it down, which is kind of useful, but it's not really doing a lot in the deck. And let's be honest, Body of Knowledge is much more synergetic with Prime Speaker, who, when you drop Prime Speaker, you want to be drawing a whole handful of cards, and you don't want to have to discard them at the end of the turn. I then also got Tishana, Voice of Thunder, and I took out Garrick's Horde for Tishana, Voice of Thunder. And the reason I did that is they're both value cards. Garrick's lets you, play that creature off the top of your library. Tishana gets you cards, the number of creatures you've got in play. Hopefully you've got a few by the time you play her. She's kind of slightly win more, but she does have that excellent clause that you have no maximum hand size again. So I've swapped them to around their similar casting costs. So I think that's fair. Next up, I took out the Oran Reef Hydra and I put in a Mana Gorger Hydra. The reason I took out the Oran Reef Hydra is because I'm not sure it was really doing much. It gains counters when you play lands. Okay, but this isn't really a sort of a landfall deck. Mana Gorger Hydra, on the other hand, is a card that you can play fairly early and will get bigger. And so if it stays around long enough, it makes it possible to cast Prime Speaker off the back of it. There's a couple of cards like that. The one that my daughter really loves most in the deck is Law Scale Kotal. So whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Law Scale Kotal, so it gradually gets bigger. Mana Gorge Hydra will probably get bigger quicker in the early game because everyone's going to try and cast a few spells to get it bigger. So it's a much better bet in the deck than the Iron Reef Hydra. I then took out Suruk the Hunt Caller. He really doesn't do much for the deck. Giving something haste that turn it comes into play isn't really doing an awful lot. And instead of that, I put in Arix Methes. And Arix Methes, okay, it's a bit janky. It comes into play tapped. You can tap it for blue and a green. Take the slumbering counters off it, and it turns into a 12/12. But it is on theme, and it wasn't too expensive, and it's a kind of a cool card. So they're like for like mana costs, so I swapped those out. Next up, I saw there was a new card, Reality Shift. Reality Shift is straight up removal. Time to Feed was in the deck. Time to Feed is slow. Requires you to have a decent creature that's going to kill one of your opponent's creatures. Reality Shift exiles target creature, makes a manifest a top card. That's not really that much important. Although they can cast it if it's a creature, they were going to get it anyway. But it's a strong card. It's a much stronger piece of removal than Time to Feed, and therefore it is beneficial to the deck. It's cheaper to cast. It's an instant, and it exiles the creature you're targeting. Lastly, I took out Primordial Sage and I put in Phyrexian Metamorph. Phyrexian Metamorph is a cheaper card to cast. I think it adds more value. You can copy certain of your own cards. You can copy artifacts that your opponents have. You can copy all sorts of different things. Whereas Primordial Sage is just drawing you a card in a card that already has plenty of draw in it. And you don't really necessarily need more draw at the stage that you're casting Primordial Sage. Phyrexian Metamorph is also slightly cheaper to cast. In fact, if you're willing to sacrifice 2 points of life, it's a lot cheaper to cast. So it could give you quite an early advantage. So those are the cards that I've swapped out. So let's now look at the deck, how it will be currently. Right, so as you can see now, I've taken the cards that I've taken out, put them in the maybe board. So I've taken out the Simic Guildgate, I've taken out Time to Feed, Suruk the Hunt Caller, Stinger Fling Spider, Iron Reef Hydra, Primordial Sage, and Garruk's Horde. And instead, I've added such wonderful cards as Tishana, the Voice of Thunder, rather. Body of Knowledge, both I think are important changes. Phyrexian Metamorph. You can see we've added Bark Channel Pathway. I can flip that. We can see that Channel Pathway or Bark Channel Pathway. Rejuvenating Springs. You can see we've added Reality Shift. So I think basically overall we've made the deck slightly better. Speaking of which, let's just have a look through the deck. So Prime Speaker Zegana, basically for 6 mana, comes down with a number of +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control, and then able you to draw cards equal to that power. So the idea was always to use very large creatures like Stormtide Leviathan, which is an 8/8, Slinvoda 8/8, Tromacrotis 8/8, Tishana's equal to the number of cards in your hand, sorry. Simic Sky Swallow 6/6, Phyrexian Ingester, well that, depending on what it ingests, can be quite large, Nessa Hall 7/7, and so on and so forth. They're all very large creatures, but you can't just automatically get the very large creatures into play. So we have spells like Coiling Oracle, Nimbus Swimmer, Sakura Tribe Elder, Law Scale Kotal, the Mana Gorge Hydra, which I was talking about earlier, Trigon Predator, Yavimaya Elder. All these cards are there for the, sort of the early game. Hopefully you get at least 1 or 2 of them in your hand to start with, or early on, especially some of the ones that can get bigger as they go along. You've got kind of a very standard list of sort of Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots. You don't really need to protect Prime Speaker because she's an ETB effect. You have to stop her being countered really more than anything else. If someone decides they don't like her, just play her again and get the extra bonus from. Thought Vessel, obviously we talked about earlier. Swords of Vengeance is in there because my daughter actually loves the card. There's another card in here that my daughter also absolutely loves, which is Make a Wish. Not the greatest card in the world, but she really loves it, and thus and therefore it's staying in the deck. She wants Jaces in the deck, but I've point blankly refused to let her have Jaces in the deck. I don't think Jace would add anything to this deck in any of his forms, and I don't like Jace anyway, so she loses that one. Especially as most of these cards have come out of my pocket. You've got cards that are designed to sort of give you mana or draw cards or mess up your enemy's planeswalker. Commander rather, not because it says creature, land, or planeswalker, but it's usually you play Imprisonment on the Moon on your opponent's commander, and it just completely messes up their game plan. It's one of those cards that gets around the if the commander goes to hand, graveyard, or exile, it can go straight back to the command zone. So Imprisoned in the Moon is just gravy. Awakening Zone is designed to give you more mana. Beastmaster's Ascension is one of those cards which I think could still come out and could be replaced. Desert Twister equally I think could be replaced. Urban Evolution possibly. Ugin's Insight possibly. Although he's probably the only instance of Jace in the whole deck is on Ugin's Insight. Shrewd Negotiation possibly could come out. Seek the Horizon possibly could come out. Make the Wish is never coming out. Explosive Vegetation, no, I think that would stay. Rampant Growth would stay. I'm thinking maybe Seek the Horizon would swap out for a Cultivate, maybe something along those lines. The lands are all the lands. They're a reasonable mix. You've not got the best lands in the world. It could probably have a Temple of... It's not a Temple of Deceit, that's blue-black. One of the temples, can't think what its name is off the top of my head. That could go in there perhaps, but I'm not into spending hundreds and £100 on dual lands and fetch lands, such like... Especially not when you've got things like Rejuvenating Springs, which in a multiplayer deck is a dual land, let's be honest. I had just noticed also that now a lot of the instants in the deck are now blue. You've got Rabid Hybridization, Cyclonic Rift, you've got Reality Shift, Cackling Counterpart, which is just a bit of fun, Dissipate, Croson Grip, Snake Form, Ether Eyes, Rewind, and Mirror Match. So I think you get the idea of the deck. There's nothing amazingly outstanding. There's no amazing combos in here. It's just full of lots of value. It gets lots of lands and mana rocks out. It then punishes you because it can basically draw a hell of a lot more cards than you can and control the game. And when she wants to, she'll just attack and just wipe you out in one go. Very rarely does she attack incidentally. She might early game if you're a little bit sort of open, but generally she turtles until she's ready to smash you. There is a nice little combo actually in the deck, which is, if she gets it out, Archetype of Imagination, which says creatures you control have flying, creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying, and Stormtide Leviathan, which says all lands or islands, in addition to their other types, creatures without flying or Iron Walk can't attack. So if you take away flying from all your opponents, and then you have a card that says creatures without flying or Iron Walk can't attack, you're screwed, and she can just basically Iron Walk you or whatever, or fly over you and kill you. Trust me, I've been on the receiving end in lots of decks. I've built a couple of decks that can beat it, but generally this deck in a casual game will beat most decks that I build, because most of the decks I build aren't necessarily as powerful as this. I built it to give her an edge because I felt I was possibly the better Magic player, although she kicks my ass so much that possibly I'm not. So now we're going to look at what cards I think I could actually add to the deck to give value to the deck, and why I would like to add them. First, let's talk about 3 cards that are questionable whether I will actually get for the deck. The first is mainly because of price. It's the Great Henge. It's, I think, £40 at the moment, and it's just too pricey, really, to be honest with you. Although it would be great in this deck, it would be great in other decks that I want to build. It's just a little bit too pricey. I may be tempted to purchase it at some point in the future, but I have a lot of hobbies and a finite budget, so just have to see about that one. The second is Crewfix, God of the Horizons. Crewfix is hard to get hold of. The original version, at least through retailers in the UK, isn't really available. I can get it on eBay, and it doesn't look like it's been too expensive. So I may go down that route, and if so, then I'll have to try and find a place for it in a deck. But the only version that's really available is the modern art version that you can see here. Sorry, by modern I just mean it's more recent than the old Star version. And that's about £15, and I think that's just a bit too much. And lastly, here we've got Uro, and Uro is about £20, and I don't actually think would offer that much to this deck. I like it; it's a clever card. I can understand why people like it and why people want to play with it, but yeah, not for this deck. Not this time around anyway. Maybe one day I'll get it, but not right now. Next, we've got some Serpents. So what I did is I had a look at what new Serpents are out there, what new Octopi are out there, and Leviathans and Krakens. And you've already seen Arixmethes. Arixmethes? Yeah, Arixmethes, who is one of the new cards I actually thought was worthwhile putting in the deck. There's 3 Serpents here. There's Aesi, Kuomo, and Serpent of the Yawning Depths. Aesi I absolutely love. We'll be getting it. Don't know how soon I'll be getting it, but definitely will be getting it. Definitely will be going in deck. I'll just have to work out what it's going to replace. Coma, I don't think suits the deck. It's more of a token-focused strategy. So it's not really something that I think would fit into this deck. Serpent of the Yawning Depths, I think, is perfect for this deck, and I think we'll actually get one as well. And again, have to work out what to put to replace in the deck to put it in. And you never know, I may find room for Whelming Wave one day and put that back in. Look at the Octopi, or the Octopuses, however you want to say it. Not such a good selection. They tend to come into play and tap stuff, which on the face of it is good, but I don't think it's that impactful unless you can flicker them. Sea Dasher Octopus is interesting. Its cost, it being 3 mana and having mutate, isn't such a bad thing. But the other two, whilst tapping 8 creatures or tapping 4 creatures does sound interesting, I don't think they're suitable for the deck. There are a couple of Leviathans and one Kraken that I did think about putting in the deck. The Kraken Brynolin, the Moon Kraken, looks like it's got some synergies with flickering, and I'm going to talk about flickering your commander a little bit later in this video, so hold this space. It is a thought, but it's a bit niche, so I'll talk about that when I look at a couple of the other cards I've been thinking about putting in the deck, and you can work out why from there. The other Leviathans that are available are really non-starters, but Brynolin is a thought. Next, I had a look at Pier and Toothy. Now, I love Pier and Toothy, and I really need a pair of them. I probably actually will end up with 2 pairs of them. Pier does a little bit of work. By doubling the number of tokens, it could double the number of tokens on Prime Speaker. And if you read Prime Speaker, it says when Prime Speaker enters the battlefield, draw cards equal to its power. But if you double the number of tokens on it, that could be in the 20s, let's be honest. You could be drawing half your deck. Toothy, meanwhile, occupies the same space as cards like Mana, Gorge, or Hydra, in that it starts out small but gets +1/+1 counters, and so can get bigger quite quickly, and therefore can enable you to bring in Prime Speaker for drawing lots of cards, which is what you want to be able to do. So I do like Pier and Toothy. I think I will be getting them. Whether both of them go in the deck or not is another matter. They should do, because one enables you to get the other. Although I really want to steal Pier and put him in a different deck. Okay, so then I had a look at Planeswalkers, and there's a couple of Planeswalkers in the deck. They are both versions of Kiora, and I did have a look at another version of Kiora, Kiora Behemoth Beckoner, which is basically just a draw engine for the deck. I don't think you'd ever take tokens off it. I think you would just let it draw you cards. And I know I also had a look at Jace. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Now, the interesting thing about Jace is, like Laboratory Maniac, he says if you go to draw a card and you can't draw a card, you win the game. Now, I'm a little bit of a fan of having alternate win cons in commander decks. So, okay, the way this deck wins, you can win in one of 2 ways, but generally, it just bulldozes the opponent. You could gear this one up so that you do commander damage with Prime Speaker and just rumble over with that, but this deck isn't quite made that way. Although if you took Sword of Vengeance, put it on Prime Speaker, and Prime Speaker came in and it was large enough, there's always ways that you could just hit for 2 turns and do that 21 damage that you need. Having a third win cons curiosity, and it is tempting. And the reason I've put Conjurer's Closet here is because Conjurer's Closet enables you to flicker Prime Speaker Zegana, which means that you would end up drawing lots more cards. And if you did that enough, you had enough tools to do that, you could trigger that win con. But that win con would be on 1 or possibly 2 cards if you put Laboratory Maniac in the deck. And I just wonder whether it's not worth having it there. But Jace does offer you a card draw, so it's that balance as to whether you pop Jace in there, which would keep the daughter happy, and have that draw there and have that alternate win con there just as a surprise. Well, that wouldn't be a particular surprise if you dropped him. Everyone could see perhaps where you were going with that, and so he may well end up with a big target on his head, and that's what Jace deserves. There's 2 more cards I'd look at: Thought Reflection and Fairies Ageless Insight. There's a marked difference between these. I know Fairies Ageless Insight has that caveat that it's not the first card you draw that gets doubled, it's any cards after that. But the fact it's only 4 mana compared to 7 mana means that it's very tempting to get and put in a deck, and I think I will, because let's be honest, who want to play, let's say you play Prime Speaker Zegana, you've got a 6/6 in play, you put 6+1/+1 tokens on her, that gives you 7 power, that means you draw 7 cards, but that gets doubled to 14, so all of a sudden you've got a hand full of whatever it was, 3, 4, whatever, plus another 14 cards to play. That's gravy all the way. And there are plenty of other cards in here that would take benefit from that as well. Ristic Study, you'd find your opponents always wanted to pay the tax on Ristic Study, I think. And there are a couple of other cards that also allow you to draw, so they're quite interesting. I then, having done all this and having looked and made a few decisions about what I want to get and put in the deck next, then had a look at EDH Rec, and I do look at EDH Rec from time to time. I say time to time quite a bit, really, to be honest with you. It's a great resource. And I had a look at the top 100 cards, and it's interesting how many cards that I have in this deck actually feature in the top 100, and I think there's a large number of them. And so, obviously, I'm not going down the wrong route with the way I'm building this particular deck. There doesn't appear to be any sort of, apart from, as I say, perhaps using Prime Speaker to draw your deck out and win that way. There doesn't seem to be any other majorly amazing ways to play the deck apart from just really playing blue and green good stuff. There's a couple of cards that I should possibly add. Beast Within was one I did think about. There's a couple in there that I didn't think were worth it. They were really expensive for what they did. A couple of the ones that are sort of the flip cards where they've got a land on one side and they function on the other, they both looked really expensive for what they were offering. By mana cost, but I mean expensive, I mean in mana cost terms, compared to what else you might want to be doing with that mana at that point in the game. So there you go, there you have it. That's my daughter's Prime Speaker Zegana deck. It's hard to play against. It's got lots of answers. It can be quite nasty if it wants to, and it will steamroll you if you let it. Thank you very much for watching. This is Players in Exile. If you like what you see, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.